Best reads of 2023. Hi, welcome to Garage Geek. This morning I was thinking, wow, I really want to make an end of the year video. What should I do? Should I talk about the best music I've listened to this year? Pull out 10 great comic books that I bought this year, my favorite ones. And then I thought, what about the 10 best books that I've read? But I was thinking, how am I going to remember all the books that I read this year? But I remembered that on my phone, I used the Libby app, and the Libby app has a history. So I could go back through the entire year and it shows when I returned books. Now, when I say best reads, it's just that because I didn't read these books. I actually listened to all these books. Before I actually start, I want to kind of give an overview of the type of reading that I did this year. I always try to hit the prize winners. And so we have the Nobel Prize, and we have Booker Prize, and we also have Hugo. And I was involved in reading books from all of those lists. Within this year, I read a bunch of Annie Ernaux's books. I also read the Jan Fosse. I'm just going to say John Fosse. Septology. He's the most recent winner of the Nobel Prize. And then I think Annie Ernaux won it last year. And I did read a couple of hers in December, but then it spilled over into January and February. Most of her books are pretty short, so you're able to get through them quite quickly. I read a lot of bookers and international bookers. So something else that I did this year was I was getting involved in many series that I hadn't previously read. One of those was the Parker series, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this year I started reading some series that I'd never read before. For example, I think I got through half of that really famous sci-fi series. And by the way, all of these series, if I started them, I need to continue. I hope to do that this year. But the really famous one, The Life, the Universe, and Everything, So Long and Thanks for All the Fishes. I can't remember what the first one's. Oh, Life, the restaurant at the end of the year. I'm getting all the titles except the first one, which is the most famous. Oh, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I read at least three in that series. I need to continue finishing that series. I read the first two books in The Little House on the Prairie. The first two, Wizard of Oz. I read the first book in the Anne of the Green Gables, but I absolutely have to continue that series. I started reading Edgar Rice Burroughs books, and I think I've read about 3 or 4 of those. I read Exorcist and Legion. I continued with Dune, and I think I finished all 6, but I have to check. I would like to continue going into the ones after the original 6. So that brings us to the 10 reads. But before I start the list, I would like to talk about one book that I read that really disappointed me. And that is going to be Time Shelter by Georgi Gasparinov. I guess there was a lot of hype around this book. Let me tell you how I read or approach a lot of the prize winners. As soon as the list is out, I just go ahead and add them, and I don't try to find out anything about them, and I just listen to them kind of blind. Time Shelter, in the title, I knew it might be about time travel. And the reason this book really disappointed me is I couldn't get over the fact that it wasted the premise. It had a really, really cool sci-fi premise. I also don't think that I got a lot of the politics that was involved in this book. Most people were raving about this book, but for me, it was just a book that I couldn't connect to. And for me, it was a huge disappointment. So take this with a grain of salt. If you're somebody who really liked Time Shelter, then you might not like some of the books that I have on my list that I counted as my 10 best. Now, these 10 are not in any particular order. They're more likely in the order that I read them. So number 1 I'm going to have is Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. So from the title, I was not looking forward to reading this because to me it sounded like a romance. I was reading it strictly because it was on a prize list. I was pleasantly surprised that this is so much more than a romance. So it does have romance in it, but it ended up being really sci-fi, and it also tackled a theme that I think is really, really interesting, and that is the idea of faith. Again, many of the books on this list will be kind of divisive. I did read online that many people did not like this. I really warmed to it. I really liked the sci-fi elements. I liked where it went. I liked the different characters, the points of view, and so yeah, I'm highly recommending Love and Other Thought Experiments. Number 2 is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Basterica. I didn't write the name down clearly. My bad. Anyways, the name will be on the cover of the book. So the reason I'm including this is because this is the book that disgusted me the most. This book was hard to listen to. And of course I should have known that, because I got this as a recommendation from, the most disgusting books. It was a YouTube video. And then I kind of put it in my list and then forgot about it. When it came up, I just listened to it, and it's gross. It's really, really hard to get through, but it involved a lot of themes and ideas that I really support, showing them in a very twisted light. Humanity in the future being so twisted, but very recognizable in many ways, and what humans will do to justify what they do. This book is going to be literally hard to stomach, but Tender is the Flesh will make you think, and it will make you question certain practices. This book is highly recommended, but it's gross. It's a book that you want to forget after you read it, but you probably won't be able to. Number 3 is going to be a very divisive book, and that is Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. Now, this was, I believe, on the long list, and this was my favorite book of all of them, all of the books on the Booker that I read. I haven't read them all yet. This book is also getting so much hate. To me, this book was such a strange read. It felt like I was dropped into an alternate Earth culture on a parallel planet where we diverged, and the people are recognizably human, but their customs are so strange. The character in this book goes about life in just the normal fashion, but does things that seem normal for her. But to me, it was like looking at someone in a zoo, like studying them. It was just the strangest experience. I really liked what this book did for me. I'm going to highly recommend Study for Obedience, but man, so many people hate this book. So many people rally about what a bad book it is to be listed as one of a prize, for being nominated for a prize. I think it should have won, which is not going to be a popular opinion. Number 4 on this list is going to be a Parker novel. So I alluded to the fact that I have read about at least seven of the Parker novels. I started the first one in December of last year, so I didn't include it. So the one I'm putting on this list is The Man with the Getaway Face, which is book number 2, but I could have included any of the 7. Every book is excellent. What this book series does is it follows one career criminal, and you get his point of view, and he's very methodical, and you get to see how he plans every job. And every job in every book is different. So you get to see different aspects of the criminal world. And in addition, in each book, there will be other characters, and you actually get to see their points of view. Since they're all doing with different types of criminal jobs, you get to see just how this criminal element it is so fascinating and so well written. So I'm going to highly, highly recommend that you read Richard Stark's Parker series. The one that I have on my list is The Man with the Getaway Face. The 5th book on my list is going to be Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Now this year, as I stated before, I've been trying to read a lot of series and a lot of kids' books series that I never read as a kid. So I wanted to get more exposure. I mean, so many of these are so important, like Wizard of Oz and Little House in the Big Woods. They're so important to culture that I felt it was time for me to be exposed to some of these. So the first one in the series is Anne of Green Gables, and I was blown away by how much I was invested in the character of that little girl. Now, I do not know, and the writing was very strong. As she grew, I was less invested in the character, so I don't know if my feelings will keep throughout the rest of the series. I believe there's 5 other books. But when she was a kid, I was so emotionally invested in her and her plight and how she acted and how she interacted with the family, her foster family, and her search to find acceptance because she's a very strange, precocious child, and her search to find love and be accepted and loved. I was drawn in hook, line, and sinker. This book is amazing. I think of anything on this list, if you pick one and you've never read Anne of Green Gables, you have to read it. It's heartwarming. There's like no other word to describe it. Anne of Green Gables is an absolute must read. And this is coming from an old man reading a kid's book. That book is powerful, and it is so well written. Number 6 on my list I read very early in the year, and that was His Bloody Project by Graham McCrae Burrett, which is a historical thriller. This book is based on true events. This is exactly the type of book that I like, where you get one character's point of view, but then it starts to be, and this is the way the character believes, but he's very flawed, and you start to see cracks in his story. So he freely admits to murders, and he starts telling his story of why he did it. Along with his confession, we get bullying and families of poverty and what they have to deal with, living on other people's lands. And it's a very well-written book that kind of transports you to the time period, puts you in the murderer's point of view, and you almost feel that what he does is justifiable. He convinces you of it, and then along the way, you start to understand why you are wrong to think that. It slowly gets peeled away. It's a very well-written book, and I would highly recommend His Bloody Project. Number 7 on my list is Foster by Claire Keegan. Now, I really wanted to put Small Things Like These, but I actually read that in December of last year. Small Things Like These is an amazing, first of all, it's a very short novel. It's like a novelette. It's almost a short story, but it really shows you what the meaning of Christmas and what true Christianity and charity is when in the face of organized religion. It's a fascinating book, so well written, about a group that was powerless, and then someone else who is also powerless who wants to stand up, and the consequences of that. However, I can't include that because I read that in December, and this year I read, I think, 2 or 3 other books by Claire Keegan, and I'm going to choose Foster. Now, Foster is, you might see a theme here. It's about a child who is seeking love and a family that is willing to begrudgingly take her in, and the bond that forms over time, and then what happens later. It's a beautifully written book. Claire Keegan is such a great writer, so I'm going to recommend that you read Foster, but I really, really recommend, especially since we're in the holiday season, that you read Small Things Like These. My 8th book recommendation is 7 Steeples by Sarah Baum. There's another theme that's kind of running through a bunch of these books, and that is people living isolated lives. I didn't mention that but in a couple of these books that I've already talked about, there is like the lone character fighting against society. But in this case, we have 2 people who move away from society and they cut themselves off. It's what their life is like and what it becomes, and how these 2 people kind of just merge into one being. They start to know each other so well, and it's all about nature and the flow of time. It's a great, well-written book. It's very different from what you would typically read because, again, it gets you involved in nature and the passage of time and routine, and how routine keeps you the same, but time has to keep changing, right? With the seasons and the years. It's just a very well-written book with a lot of interesting themes. And it's so different because of what it does with the narrative. The 9th book on this list, or the penultimate one, is going to be very different from all the other ones. And that is Confess by Rob Halford. Now, I do not read much biography or autobiography. And so I was challenged, I think, on my YouTube to read this in a sense. And I did, and I read it, and I broke it into 2 reviews. But the reason that I really warmed up to this novel is because it's about the lead singer of Judas Priest. And I was never a big Judas Priest fan, but Rob Halford, the whole time period that he goes through and the experiences that he goes through being a closeted gay man in a society where he can't come out, but he's so widely known, and then he's going through disastrous relationship after relationship, often leading to drug addiction and alcohol abuse. His fight through that and his able to come through to the other side to find a happy ending. Sorry, I didn't mean it to sound like that. Maybe Rob found many happy endings. It does end in a very positive note. And since I lived through so many of the things that are mentioned in this book, I found that I was able to connect with the material in so many ways. And is this going to be the best autobiography you ever read? No. For me, it resonated. This book is not just for people who are interested in hard rock or music. It's kind of indicative of the political and social changes that were happening at the time that Rob was living through. I should say Mr. Halford. So the final book that I'm going to recommend is actually 3 books, which is actually 7 books. So I mentioned that I had read Jon Fosse's Septology. I had a lot of fun with this book, although with these books. I'm just gonna, since it's actually one body and it's all the same character who goes, it's 7 different parts, I'm gonna include this as one work. There are a lot of things about this that I found frustrating, which was the repetition. But it also does serve a purpose, but for me, it was just something that was rubbing me the wrong way. If I was able to get past that and really, really enjoy the journey that this character goes on through memory and his relationships to different people and his slide back and forth through time periods. This is really a lot about the character's memory. And he would seamlessly slide back and forth through time. And as a reader, we would have to be clued in on when he was time sliding because of, I think he's suffering from some type of Alzheimer's, where he's not understanding where he is in the moment. This is never mentioned in the book, but he is, like, either through memory or because he has some kind of problem that is starting, his memory just slides. And once you start to understand that's what's happening, you're really getting not just, I think it's 7 days in the life. I think that's the 7. But we're actually getting this man's entire life from different time periods. This is an amazing work of fiction, and I'm actually looking forward to reading more by this author. I'm wondering if the repetition was just due to this set of books, and maybe that won't be. Maybe that was the style he chose. But even with that, I really enjoyed what this author had to give to this character, and for that reason, I'm going to recommend that you read the Septology. Of course, there were many books that I listened to this year that I did not include, but what did you think of the 10 that I shared with you? If you read any of these and you dislike them, I'm more than happy to hear why. I know some of the books that I picked, especially Study for Obedience, are very hotly contested. So many people did not like that book. Of course, reading is subjective, and so some people are going to latch on to certain ideas in books than others. I welcome all comments. I'd love to hear what you think. So those are my 10 best reads of 2023, and let's see where our reading takes us in 2024. Oh, Angel, you want to say goodbye? Say goodbye to 2024, Angel.